trade policy, but what they have is simply legally impossible because the European Union rules do not allow a third country to have an influence on EU trade policy. No, Mr. Speaker, I've made clear that in the 9 minutes which I accepted to give other members time, I'll not be giving way. Mr. Speaker, for much of this debate, I didn't recognise the country that was being described as the country that I live in. A country that seemed by many to be described as isolated, inept, intimidated by its own future. I believe in the future of this country. We are not passengers in our own destiny. We are able to control our own future. This is a country with exports at record levels. This is a country which last year, when global foreign direct investment fell 40%, it went up 20% in the United Kingdom. A country with employment at an all-time high. More consecutive quarters of growth than any other G7 country. A country which is producing these results under good Conservative management. And nor, Mr. Speaker, did I understand the picture painted about the deals already, the preparations already made for no deal, because we have spent a great deal of time, and our civil service has spent a great deal of time on the mitigations. Pharmaceutical companies, I'm not taking intervention. Pharmaceutical companies ensuring adequate stocks, increased air freight capacity. We've set our new tariff policies for day one, liberalising our economy so that 87% of our imports will be tariff-free, setting up a trade remedies authority to protect our steel industry and our ceramics. And the EU has also made its own preparations. We need to keep some balance in this debate, Mr. Speaker.
Much gesticulation. The right honourable and learned gentleman, the member for Rushcliffe, is seeking to intervene, but it is for order. It is for the Secretary of State to decide, and as I understand it, he's aware of the intended intervener, but does not wish to take the intervention.
Mr. Speaker, the Father of the House already had longer time to make his contributions than I've had today. I want to answer the direct question asked of me earlier. I want to answer the direct question asked of the right honourable member for Normanton Pontefract in Castleford. She asked a very direct question. Is the result of this vote that the default position is that we will not leave the EU on the 29th of March without a withdrawal agreement? That is the result of the motion that we are debating tonight. But I have to say to the right honourable lady that the only way to take no deal off the table in the longer term is to have a negotiated deal, unless we are to revoke Article 50 and have no Brexit. There is no worse outcome for this House and this country and our democracy than to have no Brexit. We have been given a clear instruction by the people of Britain. In the days ahead, we in this House must decide who in our democracy are the masters and who are the servants. We heard from the Honourable Lady, the member for Bath, what can only be described as a diatribe about the will of the people, which she derided. I happen to believe that when this House contracts out its sovereignty on an issue, which we did on the European Union, and we tell the people of Britain that we will accept what decision they take, we are honour and duty bound to take that decision. And when she says the will of the people doesn't matter, it may not matter to the Liberal Democrats, it does to the Conservative Party. For me, Mr. Speaker, this is ultimately a decision about our democratic values.
Order. I fear it's more a point of frustration. No impropriety. Order. I have said she may be irritated, but the right honourable gentleman is not giving way. Now is not a time for points of order. Later, if she wants to do so, I'll take it. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, for me, what we are engaged in is the most important democratic debate in this country's history. The British people have given our Parliament a clear instruction. It is time for us to determine who is the boss.
Under the order of the House of today, I must now put the questions necessary to dispose of proceedings on the motion. We begin with Amendment A in the name of the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Meriden, who has since advised me and equally, or more importantly, the House, that she does not wish to move her amendment. However, and I thank her for her courtesy in telling me and the House, however, I am advised that her co-signatory, it's in the ownership of the House, the Right Honourable Lady for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford, does. Is that
I do welcome the assurances that the Minister said, but they were slightly confusing, so I will move formally so there is some clarity.
She wishes. Don't tell me it's not moved. I know perfectly well what I'm doing. The amendment is in the ownership of the House. The Right Honourable Lady perfectly properly has decided she doesn't wish to move it. Another member who signed it does. It's really a very simple point for an experienced parliamentarian. The question is that Amendment A be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I can't do it. Sorry. Order. The question is that Amendment A be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Nick Smith and Bambos Charalambus. Tellers for the noes, Jeremy Quinn and Alistair Jack. The doors! Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 308.
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 308. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Order. We come now to Amendment F for Freddie, in the name of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Ashford, who moves it formally. The question is that Amendment F be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division! Clear the lobby! Order. The question is that Amendment F be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Bill Wiggin and Marcus Fish. Tellers for the noes, and Mr. Peter Bone and Mr. Steve Double. the doors! Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 164. The noes to the left, 374.
The ayes to the right, 164. The noes to the left, 374. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. The question is the main motion as amended. That is to say, as amended by Amendment A. The question is the main motion as amended. As many as have that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby! Order. 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 The question is the main motion as amended. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Nick Smith and Bambos Charalambos. Tell us for the noes, Jeremy Quinn and Alistair Jack. Order.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 278.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 278. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Order. Point of order. The Prime Minister.
On point of order, Mr. Speaker. The House has today provided a clear majority against leaving without a deal. However, I will repeat what I have said before.
The House must calm itself. Long time to go. Today, subsequent days. Keep calm. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, these are about the choices that this House faces. The legal default in UK and EU law remains that the UK will leave the EU without a deal unless something else is agreed. The onus is now on every one of us in this House to find out what that is. The options before us are the same as they always have been. We could leave with the deal which this government has negotiated over the past 2 years. We could leave with the deal we have negotiated but subject to a second referendum, but that would risk no Brexit at all. Damaging the fragile trust between the British public damaging the fragile trust between the British public and the members of this House. We could seek to negotiate a different deal. However, the EU has been clear that the deal on the table is indeed the only deal available. Mr. Speaker, I also confirmed last night...
Order. The great likelihood, I await further comment, but I think I can say this without fear of contradiction, is that there will be further opportunities for these matters to be debated. But in the immediate term, please, let us have some courtesy. Of that I think we can be sure. There will be further debate on these matters. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I also confirmed last night that if the House declined to approve leaving without a deal on the 29th of March 2019, the Government would bring forward a motion on whether the House supports seeking to agree an extension to Article 50 with the EU, which is the logical consequence of the votes over the past 2 days in this House. The Leader of the House will shortly make an emergency business statement confirming the change to tomorrow's business. The motion we will table will set out the fundamental choice facing this House. If the House finds a way in the coming days to support a deal, it would allow the Government to seek a short, limited technical extension to Article 50 to provide time to pass the necessary legislation and ratify the agreement we have reached with the EU. But let me be clear, such a short technical extension is only likely to be on offer if we have a deal in place. Therefore, the House has to understand and accept that if it is not willing to support a deal in the coming days, and as it is not willing to support leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, then it is suggesting that there will need to be a much longer extension to Article 50. Such an extension would undoubtedly require the United Kingdom to hold European Parliament elections in May 2019. I do not think that would be the right outcome. But the House needs to face up to the consequences of the decisions it has taken.
I thank the Prime Minister for what she said. Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tonight this House has once again definitely ruled out no deal. The Prime Minister said the choice was between her deal and no deal. In the last 24 hours, Parliament has decisively rejected both her deal and no deal. While an extension of Article 50 is now inevitable, the responsibility of that extension lies solely and squarely at the Prime Minister's door. But, Mr. Speaker, extending Article 50 without a clear objective is not a solution. Parliament must now take control of the situation. In the days that follow, Mr. Speaker, myself, the Shadow Brexit Secretary and others will have meetings with members across the House to find a compromise solution that can command support in the House. This means, Mr. Speaker, doing what the Prime Minister failed to do 2 years ago in searching for a consensus on the way forward. Labour has set out a credible alternative plan. Honourable members across this House are coming forward with proposals, whether that's for a permanent customs union, a public vote, Norway Plus, or other ideas. Let us, as a House of Commons, work now to find a solution to deal with the crisis facing this country and the deep concerns that many people have for their livelihood, for their lives, their future, their jobs, their communities and their factories. It's up to us, as the House of Commons, to look for and find a solution to their concerns. That is what we were elected to do.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be in no doubt that we are in a constitutional crisis. And we're in a constitutional crisis at the making of the Prime Minister that has run down the Brexit clock. And what we see from the Prime Minister is a denial of the facts, that she's faced 2 enormous defeats on her meaningful vote. Her deal is dead. And I am delighted that the House of Commons tonight has given a very clear expression that this House, under no circumstances, on no time limit, wants no deal. And what the Prime Minister should have done this evening is come to the dispatch box with a degree of humility, accept that she has failed, and to immediately put in place the legislation to withdraw from legislation the threat of us leaving the European Union on the 29th of March. Why has the Prime Minister not done that? What this House needs to do tomorrow is to take control of that process. We don't need a time-limited extension to Article 50. It must be open-ended, and I, for one, welcome elections to the European Parliament. But we now, Mr. Speaker, must move on and have a meaningful debate about a people's vote. And yes, if necessary, we have to look at the revocation of Article 50. But let me say this to the Prime Minister, I repeat again, that Scotland will not be dragged out of the European Union against its will, and everything which has gone on in this House is a determination that the best interest of the people of Scotland will be as an independent European nation.
I will come to the honourable gentleman, but I will take the Leader of the Liberal Democrat Party first. Yes, point of order, Mr. Cable.
Mr. Speaker, now that the House has given effect to its will so clearly on separate occasions, can you give us the benefit of your help and your advice as to how to translate these declaratory motions into practical action?
If the right honourable gentleman would forgive me, and to be honest, even if he won't, I prefer to hear remaining points of order and then to invite the Leader of the House to deliver the supplementary or emergency business statement, and we will see what is intended to take place tomorrow, and we may well learn tomorrow of what is intended to take place in subsequent days. There has been a clear expression of will by the House. I rather imagine there will be conversations amongst colleagues. What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is, ultimately, the House can debate what the House wants to debate, and we will see what it wants to debate and what shape events take in the days to come. I don't want to express myself more forcefully than that, and I don't think that would be right. But the right honourable gentleman need be in no doubt that these matters will be fully debated and members will have the opportunity to put their point of view, and in all likelihood, many propositions will come to be tested. If the Right Honourable Gentleman will forgive me, I'll just take the point of order first from Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if you might be in a position to confirm that as a matter of constitutional fact, a motion of this House, though important, cannot override statute law.
A motion of the House does not override statute law. That is true. If members who have supported a motion want to ensure its ultimate success, further steps are required. And I think members who have keenly attended to these matters in recent weeks are aware of that, and they know that there are opportunities available to them if they wish to take those opportunities. Yes, point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding what the Prime Minister has just told the House, the time has come for two things to take place. The first is for the government to respect the democratic instruction of the House of Commons. And the second, since the Prime Minister says we have to be in favour of something, and I agree with her, is for the government to facilitate the House of Commons having the chance to vote on a series of indicative propositions so that we can attempt to see whether we can find a way forward. And I very much welcome, if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, what you said a moment ago about your willingness to ensure that the House of Commons gets the opportunity to debate that which it wishes to debate.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. I stand by that. I think it's what any self-respecting speaker should say and mean. I will deal with those who indicated earlier, but I'll come to the Right Honourable Lady. Point of order, Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do wonder how the Prime Minister has the brass neck to come to this chamber and to say that we should be worried about losing fragile trust when she herself is responsible for losing the trust both of this Parliament and of the country. She has just whipped her members to vote against the deal which yesterday she stood at that dispatch box and promised would be a free vote. We need urgently an extension of Article 50, and it needs to not be time limited, because we need the time that is necessary in order to resolve this by going back to the country. Because if the last few weeks have proved anything, it is that MPs in this House are incapable of finding something they agree on, and it needs to go back to the people as soon as possible in a people's vote.
What I say to the Honourable Lady, who was intending, I thought, or attempting to raise a point of order, is that we will have to wait for the business statement by the Leader of the House, but unless I have a problem with my short-term memory, and I don't think I do, my clear recollection is that the government indicated that if the House voted to demonstrate its opposition to exit from the European Union without a deal in the vote or votes today, there would be an opportunity on Thursday for there to be votes, or a vote, or possibly a number of votes, on an idea or ideas of Article 50 extension. So I keenly anticipate that the Honourable Lady will be in her place, not just for the business statement, but tomorrow for such important proceedings as we can expect to take place. Before I come to the Honourable Gentleman, point of order, the Father of the House, Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, when these arrangements for this week were announced, my understanding was that the government was saying that if they lost the vote on their preferred deal, then there would be 2 days in which the House would be given the opportunity to express its clear opinion on no deal, and if that was clear, another day to say whether an extension was desired by the House, with the plain implication that the government was going to accept the decision of the House and act on it. Indeed, we understand a free vote was extended to ministers so that the proper expression of opinion could be given. As soon as the House expressed its opinion on no deal, the government attempted to quash it and voted against it, putting a 3-line whip on the people they'd previously given a free vote, with a complete lack of success, so that the majority actually soared. So if this evening the Prime Minister or another minister will not just accept that this is not just another motion, as if it was a Women's Institute debate that had expressed an opinion, could... And I have higher regard for Women's Institute's opinions than I do. I have a better regard than the government has for the opinions of this House. But can we have an assurance from somebody that tomorrow's debate is actually intended to set policy and is not just a mere expression of opinion? That's my serious point, though no doubt I'd be deluged with protests from women's institutes around the country. The unfortunate example I chose. I repeat my complete respect for the opinion of all Women's Institute
Grateful to the right honourable learned gentleman for his point of order. My understanding, for what it's worth, is the same as his. That was the clear commitment. I'm sure that is what was intended, that was what was promised, that was what was understood, and I'm sure that I have every expectation that the Leader of the House will reiterate today what's been said in recent days. It would be very strange if that weren't the case, but I have no reason to believe that the government has suddenly shifted from the position it's taken in recent days. I have no reason to believe that. We'll have to wait to see, but I have no reason to believe that at all. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House has spoken, and the will of the House is clear. But the government have given no indication so far that they are going to facilitate the will of the House becoming a reality by amending statute. In fact, if anything, I think the Prime Minister gave the opposite impression in her rather churlish response to the events of tonight. If the government, Mr. Speaker, decides not to facilitate us changing the statute, which would prevent us leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, in clear contravention of the just expressed will of the House, what, Mr. Speaker, can you do to facilitate this Parliament in ensuring that the government will not get its way?
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable lady. My understanding is that the government has tabled its motion for tomorrow, and it might help colleagues if they obtain copies of it. I don't think it's for me now to read out the government's motion for tomorrow. Very well. As I understand it, the government, in the name of the Prime Minister, and I thank the government for this, is tabling, or has tabled, a motion in the name of the Prime Minister that this House notes the resolutions of the House of the 12th and 13th of March and accordingly agrees the government will seek to agree with the European Union an extension of the period specified in Article 50, subsection 3, agrees that if the House has passed a resolution approving the negotiated withdrawal agreement and the framework for the future relationship for the purposes of section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 by 20th March 2019, that the government will seek to agree with the European Union a one-off extension of the period specified in Article 50, subsection 3 for a period ending on the 30th of June 2019 for the purpose of passing the necessary EU exit legislation, and notes that if the House has not passed a resolution approving the negotiated withdrawal agreement and the framework for the future relationship for the purposes of section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 by the 20th of March 2019, then it is highly likely the European Council at its meeting the following day would require a clear purpose for any extension, not least to determine its length, and any extension beyond the 30th of June 2019 would require the United Kingdom to hold European Parliament elections in May 2019. That is the order. That is the government's motion on the paper for tomorrow. That motion, of course, is amendable. That motion is amendable. So if colleagues on either side or in any part of the House wish to submit amendments to that motion, they will have an opportunity to do so, and I'm speaking on my feet and off the top of my head, but the same logic will apply in respect of that motion as has applied over the previous 2 days, namely that any amendments to it tabled before the rise of the House tonight will appear on the order paper tomorrow. However, if there are manuscript amendments tabled after the rise of the House but before 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, they will be accepted for consideration by the Chair, by me. I would very politely suggest to the Honourable Lady, I will take one further point of order if necessary, well, I would very politely suggest that very soon we ought at least to hear the business statement by the Leader of the House. I will take two very briefly. Well, no, I don't want to. Can I politely suggest that it might be advisable to. I will take one who signalled to me, the Honourable Lady, the member for Wakefield, and then let's hear the statement by the Leader. And if there are then further points of order, I can take them. Point of order, Mary Cray.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker, but the business motion that you've just read out at speed indicates that the government is clearly making this House a prisoner of its deal, because what it is saying is that we have to agree the deal by the 20th of March. And if we do that, we get the extension that this House is clearly going to be voting for tomorrow. When will the government allow this House to express any alternatives to the deal that the Prime Minister, despite having been defeated twice, is still trying to railroad through this place?
And that is one of the merits of hearing about the business for next week. And there is also merit in colleagues conferring with each other, as, not surprisingly and with frequency, they do. Very well. Point of order, Anna Soubry.
Speaker, it is a constitutional crisis, and I'm sorry if it bores people on that side of the House who have just voted as Conservatives for a no-deal Brexit. But in any event, Mr. Speaker, there is a real concern that time and again this House speaks, and we vote as you have seen this evening, and the response at the dispatch box is in effect for what we pass to be utterly dismissed. And somehow, Mr. Speaker, we seek your guidance as a House as to how we actually can have a genuine impact on the way that this Brexit is now conducted and how this government responds. We hear tonight that 4 cabinet ministers abstained. We hear of other ministers who have resigned. It is a crisis of unprecedented levels, and I'm afraid it's a front bench that yet again has many pairs of tin ears, and it's got to stop. Do we need now to enact statute in some way so the will of this House can prevail?
I maintain that we should hear before very long the Leader of the House. I will take the right honourable gentleman. But what I would say to the right honourable lady is that I think she is well aware that a number of members across the House in recent weeks have had a concern about this particular policy issue, and if significant numbers of members across the House have a concern and a desire to act in common on this matter, it is open to them to explore the potential for doing so. And they will find that they get professional advice on that matter, as any member of the House is entitled to seek and obtain professional advice. It's not for me now here to say exactly what should happen, but what I will say is that members can work together and be heard. Point of order, yes. All right. The honourable gentleman doesn't need to put his hand up as he is in the classroom. It's not necessary. Point of order, Mr. Bob Seeley.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much indeed. Does the will of the House trump the will of the people?
That is a very interesting philosophical question, and I'm sure that the honourable gentleman has focused on it. This House operates in accordance with its own procedures, including, therefore, importantly, with its standing orders. It is not for me to seek to interpret the will of the people. The honourable gentleman is a most dedicated public servant and has now been in the House for a little over 18 months, may well feel that he's very close to his people, and I don't say that in any pejorative spirit. He may well feel he is, and that he is deeply attuned to the will of the people. I don't claim that I am, and it's not for the Speaker to be. It is for the Speaker to seek to facilitate the will of the legislature. Point of order, Pat McFadden.
I'm grateful to you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister spoke at the dispatch box a couple of weeks ago to set out the arrangements for this week, she said if the House voted down her proposed deal, there would then be a vote on no deal today. That has happened, and she said that if the House voted against leaving on a no-deal basis, we would then have an opportunity to vote to ask the government to seek an extension to Article 50. She did not say that was conditional on passing her deal between this week and the application of the extension. This motion, which the government have tabled, is a breach of the letter and spirit of the assurances given at that dispatch box a couple of weeks ago. This is an attempt to stitch up the decision tomorrow. The House should not stand for it, and we should have a clean vote on instructing the government to apply for an extension to Article 50 without having to approve her deal beforehand.
Yeah, well, I understand what the right honourable gentleman is saying, but the government's position is not a matter for me. I say with a matter of pride that I have never been a member of a government. It's never been part of my ambition. I must say to the right honourable gentleman, it's a lot easier to be Speaker than to be a Minister. My responsibility is to consider amendments if they are tabled. That's my responsibility, and if members want to table amendments to the government's motion, they can do so, and I rather imagine from what the right honourable gentleman is saying that he would want to do so. Point of order, Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, further to that point of order, I want to echo what my honourable friend said. People across this House will have heard the Prime Minister unconditionally say that these days would be about a vote on whether we would accept no deal and then a vote on an extension, not a conditional vote. And the Prime Minister sits on the front bench shaking her head. Maybe she can, through you, Mr. Speaker, now explain why what you read out, Mr. Speaker, is not a conditional vote, because it sure sounds like it to us.
No, okay. No, the Prime Minister is not seeking to raise a point of order at this stage. Point of order, Mr. Ian Mearn.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, and I think this actually might be a point of order. I'm just seeking some clarification from yourself, because you did say that the tabling of manuscript amendments tomorrow would be until 10:30. Well, the business begins at 9:30, and I thought there might be some disparity there.
So I can help the honourable gentleman. I appreciate that he was listening attentively. There is no contradiction or tension whatever. The honourable gentleman correctly surmises that the House tomorrow, as on every Thursday that we sit, will meet at 9:30. But I say this as much for the benefit of people listening to our proceedings as for the benefit of members. Question time is at 9:30. At 10:30 we would ordinarily have either urgent questions or move straight to the business statement from the Leader of the House. And I appreciate the honourable gentleman's concern, not just for colleagues, but for me, but I am perfectly sanguine about a deadline of 10:30 for the submission of amendments, and I am comfortable that I would be able to make judgments in time for the start of the debate, and for the debate to take place on an informed basis. So there is no problem there. Point of order, Neil Gray.
For your forbearance, Mr. Speaker. The House has spoken, and has spoken very clearly. It is asked to rule out no deal at any time. Now, you said in response to the honourable member from North East Somerset and in response to the right honourable lady from Wallasey that the opportunities would be open for opposition members to ensure that the will of the House was followed through. But given that the government is in charge of the order paper, would you not expect the Government to be coming forward with the necessary legislation to ensure that no deal is ruled out at any time?
Not sure that it's really for me to say that I expect one particular course of action or another. I feel now that I've been around a little while, and sometimes predictable things have happened, and sometimes some very unpredictable and even in some cases rather curious things have happened. So I've got used to all range of possibilities, and I don't think I would say that I expect this or I expect that. What I do expect, not specifically of the government, what I expect is that if members feel strongly dissatisfied with what is an offer to them, they will communicate with each other and they will come forward, seek professional advice, seek my own, and attempt to ensure that what they wish to be debated as elected members of the legislature is indeed debated, and of course by definition not just debated but voted upon by the House. Right. Yes, point of order, Mr. Peterbone.
Following on to what you've just said, isn't it a fact that the moaning minis on the other side attacking the government, if they really had any guts, the way to do it is to table a confidence motion in the government? That's how it's traditionally done, not by some backdoor means.
Perfectly legitimate. The honourable gentleman expresses his point of view with his characteristic force. It's open to people to table motions of no confidence. Of course it is. That is a perfectly proper course of action, and that can happen and does from time to time. I think we'll leave it there. If there are no further points of order, we come now to the emergency business statement by the Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, in light of tonight's decision, I should like to inform the House that tomorrow's business will now be a debate on a motion relating to an extension of Article 50. On Friday the 15th of March, the House will consider private members' bills. I shall announce next week's business tomorrow in the usual way. Thank you.
Valerie Vaz.
Mr. Speaker, yet again we have an emergency motion to the House, and yet again we've only just had sight of this motion. My honourable friend has managed to give us copies of it. This is no way to run a government and no way to run a country. We've got a situation now where the government are voting against their own motions, which is a terrible state of affairs. The government is staggering from week to week, day to day and motion to motion. The country, Mr. Speaker, deserves better.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you. The Leader of the House. No, the Leader doesn't wish to comment on that. No, fair enough. No, I mean it's a business statement, so she can respond if she wishes. No, she doesn't wish to do so. Very well. Mr. Pete Wishart.
Neither wonder does she choose not to respond, because that was quite a pathetic statement, given the events that have happened tonight, the chaotic cluelessness at the heart of government. The public must be watching this place and wondering what on earth is still going on, and the petulant response from the Prime Minister was quite unsatisfactory to the events that have just preceded that thing. This government is still determined to flog a dead deal, and at some point they're going to have to accept that this game is over. Now, we just got sight of this motion for tomorrow, and it seems to me that it's readily amendable. All we need to get rid of is the first two parts, and we'll get to what this House really wants and requires, which is an extension of Article 50 indefinitely until we get this issue resolved and we can do these other things. Because what has to happen, Mr. Speaker, is the will of the House has to be respected in these matters. And I've seen the business for next week. I've seen the provisional business. There's nothing in it, nothing at all. So what this government can do is bring forward a piece of legislation which reflects the wishes of this House to put down a motion which will ensure that no deal is taken off the table through legislation. And can we hear from the Leader of the House that that is in her thinking and that's what she intends to do? Because that's what this House expects and that's what this country now expects.
Well, as the honourable gentleman will know, the Prime Minister set out some time ago now that should the House reject the withdrawal agreement and future declaration, that there would be a discussion for the House to decide whether it wished to take leaving the EU without a deal off the table, and then should the House make that decision, there would then be a further discussion on whether the House wishes to seek an extension to Article 50. That is the motion that will be discussed tomorrow, and as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has just said, tomorrow's motion will set out the fundamental choices facing this House. If this House finds a way in the coming days to support a deal that this House has decided to support, then that will allow the government to seek a short, limited technical extension to Article 50 to the 30th of June 2019 to provide time to pass the necessary legislation and ratify the agreement we have reached with the EU. If the House doesn't, however, find the way to support a deal in the coming days, and it is not willing to support leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, then it is highly likely that the EU will require a clear purpose for any extension, not least to determine its length, and that any extension beyond the 30th of June 2019 would require the United Kingdom to hold European Parliament elections in May. I hope that answers the honourable gentleman's question.
Thank you. Chris Bryant.
The motion that we now know is going to be debated tomorrow, and doubtless may be amended or subject to amendments, says that the House has to agree a motion on approving the negotiated withdrawal agreement and framework by the 20th of March. Yeah. Does that mean that the government intends to bring forward the same motion as we have already dismissed in this session of Parliament on Monday or Tuesday of next week? If so, I would gently suggest to the Leader of the House that this flouts all the conventions that have operated in this House since the 16th century, where it has always been held that if a motion has been dismissed in one session of Parliament, it cannot be brought again. And regularly, clerks refuse to accept 10-minute rule bills and private members' bills that have already been disposed of in the session. So are we going to have that on Monday or Tuesday? And if so, does she not confidently expect the Speaker to refuse to allow it?
Well, the honourable gentleman will be aware that the House has just voted twice on the amendment in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden, amongst others, and that was on the same amendment.
That's not true. Andrew Regal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It appears to me that the Leader of the House is merely organising to have meaningful vote 3 on exactly the same deal, in complete contravention of the will of this House, as has been expressed now in two defeats of this bill, the government motion. And shouldn't she, instead of attempting to play this ridiculous game of chicken with the future of our country, and her attempt to tear up all the conventions of this House and show nothing but contempt for the way in which this House has made its decisions, shouldn't she be facilitating the decisions of this House by moving an amendment, an SI, which will take the date of us leaving the European Union, 29th of March 2019, out of the statute? Isn't that what her job is?
No. Well, the right honourable lady will be aware that the motion tomorrow is amendable. It is for this House to decide if it wants to put forward amendments and vote on them. And as my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said, if the House votes for an extension, she will seek to agree that extension approved by the House with the EU and will bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension.
Kirsty Blackman.
Well, does the programme motion tomorrow mean that the votes will be at the moment of interruption, or will they be at some other time?
The motion of the House sets out that it will be at the moment of interruption, but of course that is subject to agreement of the House.
Maria Eagle.
Speaker. Can the Leader of the House undertake this evening to ensure at the end of this process that the government, and she uses her best endeavours to make sure it happens, facilitates the will of the House by making time and bringing forward statutory changes to enable the will of this House to be enacted, instead of simply offering us more motions that don't do and do not have the operative executive impact that this House has voted for? Will she undertake to do that?
Well, what I can say to the Right Honourable Lady is that the Prime Minister and I have both said that if the House votes for an extension, we will seek to agree that extension approved by the House with the EU, and we will bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension. But as has been said on a number of occasions, it is not within the government's gift to insist on an extension. That will be a matter for agreement with the European Union and will potentially be subject to conditions imposed by it. And she will be aware that it will require unanimous agreement by all 27 members of the EU. But what I can reassure her is that that decision would come back to this House finally and would need to be approved by Parliament.
Clive Efford.
It's only a little while ago that the government was attacking the Leader of the Opposition for not agreeing to meet with the Prime Minister. Now, if we were trying to fulfil the will of the House, surely the government would be reaching out to all sections of this House to try and find a way through this. So can the Leader of the House say where in this timetable is a facility for those sorts of discussions to take place?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman will be aware that the Prime Minister has sought to reach out to members right across the House. The Leader of the Opposition was willing to meet on one occasion only, and that very late on in the discussions. But the Prime Minister and ministers, including the Brexit Secretary, have sought to get the views of members right across this House and will continue to do so.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House, as she knows, has a hugely important constitutional role. That is to be the voice of Parliament to government.
Yep.
What we're seeing is, and I say this to the Leader of the House, is vote after vote in this chamber seemingly is being ignored by the government, as we heard from the Prime Minister earlier this evening. Tomorrow, the Leader has announced that we are to have a motion on extending Article 50. Which can be amended. What would the Leader say to me if this House passes those amendments, takes out the conditionality that the government have put into it? As we've seen over the last 2 or 3 votes, it appears the government will just ignore the vote.
Yep.
How is it that we can have confidence in the motions that we discuss, the motions that we pass, and how can we have confidence in the Leader who has demonstrated in other areas that she has spoken up for Parliament? She should be roaring to the executive that this will of the Parliament as being expressed is being ignored. What is she going to do about that?
Well, what I would say to the Honourable Gentleman is I take very seriously my role as Parliament's voice in government, and at all times I seek to ensure that the views across the House are heard in government very clearly, and I will always stand up for Parliament in that way. And as I have always said, the government takes very seriously views expressed by this House. The Prime Minister has been clear that if this House votes for an extension, the government will seek to agree that extension with the EU and will bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, this needn't be the Schleswig-Holstein question all over again, but it does risk driving us all a bit mad. But now that no deal has been ruled out by the House, is it now not the case that the only thing within the House's gifts in its entirety, not having to rely on member states of the European Union, is the revocation of Article 50 in its entirety?
Well, the honourable gentleman will be fully aware that the revocation of Article 50 would mean we were not leaving the European Union, and therefore we were in direct contravention of the will of the people expressed in the referendum, and the government will not be doing that.
I'd simply say to colleagues, I think it is clear that whatever the House decides will not be a state secret. That will become public. It will be known. That message will be communicated. In fairness, I think the Leader of the House has acknowledged that whatever the House decides, it will be communicated to the European Union. That will happen, and the wording of what has been decided will be absolutely crystal clear. So the will of the House will be forwarded to the European Union, whatever that will is. Mr. David Linden.
Given that we have seen lots of briefings that meaningful vote free will take place at some point next week, and given that the pound appears to be going tonto just about every day, can the Prime Minister tell us when meaningful vote free will be, so that the markets can prepare for that nonsense next week again?
Well, what I can say to the honourable gentleman is I will be announcing next week's business tomorrow, but obviously he will be aware that what we're focused on now is trying to identify what is the will of the House, and that's why we've brought forward a motion so that the House can discuss tomorrow its desire or otherwise for an extension to Article 50.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll not rehearse the sequence of events that we were promised this week in terms of why we've got here this evening, but I'm utterly astonished that the Leader of the House has produced this motion for us to debate tomorrow, which is essentially a forerunner to meaningful vote number 3. Because the entirety of the motion is dependent upon this House giving an expression again by the 20th of March of not what she said to the Honourable Gentleman for Perth and North Perthshire of a deal, but the negotiated withdrawal agreement and the framework for the future relationship, which is the current EU withdrawal agreement and the current framework for future relationship that this House has already rejected twice. So if you are listening to the will of this House, this motion tomorrow should clearly say we have listened to the will of the House and we will go back to the European Union to seek an extension, should it not?
Well, as I've said to a number of honourable members, the government is listening very carefully to the views of the House. That's why my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said that we would, if the meaningful vote was not passed, that we would come back to the House today with a vote on rejecting a no-deal Brexit, and in the event that that was passed, that we would come back to the House tomorrow to seek the House's views on an extension of Article 50. So that is exactly what we are doing. And the Prime Minister has further, as have I just now, said that we will seek, if the House wants an extension to Article 50, we will seek to agree that with the European Union. But what honourable members do have to understand, it is not within the government's gift to insist on an extension. That will be a matter for agreement with the European Union.
I think everybody is aware of that. I don't wish to be unkind to the Leader, but I don't think she's telling us anything that we don't know. We all know that. Well, repetition is not an unknown phenomenon in the House of Commons, but I understand what she's saying. But I think everybody is perfectly well aware that an extension request is that. It's a request. Indeed. West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In claiming the government is listening, the Leader of the House really is stretching the boundaries of credibility, I'm afraid. The Prime Minister was told after Chequers that the Chequers proposals did not command a majority of the House, and she ignored it and she went off to Brussels. She came back with something worse and then feigned surprise when, funnily enough, the House didn't vote for it. The Prime Minister and the government have now been told twice, not in small numbers, in unprecedented historical numbers, that this deal does not command the support of the House of Commons. What the Leader of the House is trying to stand up this evening is, as has already said, meaningful vote 3. That will not succeed either. And so all she is doing and facilitating as Leader of the House is running down the clock, limiting our options and harming our country. I think it's reckless, it's irresponsible, and it's not how she should be behaving as Leader of the House. So can she tell us when she plans to bring back meaningful vote 3. Why not do it tomorrow so we can inflict the defeat sooner rather than later?
Well, the honourable gentleman is simply wrong. The Prime Minister set out, in response to the strong desire of this House, a trajectory towards a second meaningful vote. If that was not passed, towards giving the House the opportunity to take leaving without a withdrawal agreement off the table, and if that was passed, giving the House an opportunity to ask for an extension to Article 50. And the Prime Minister has been clear, she will comply with the House's request. And all I am pointing out is two things. One is it will be a request, the government cannot insist on it. And secondly, the motion tomorrow will be amendable. So if the honourable gentleman wants to put forward an alternative proposal that he believes will carry the House, then of course, by definition, in an amendable motion, he is able to do so.
Steve Baker.
Since the last vote, I've taken the opportunity to canvass the external Brexit campaign groups to find out their opinion, whether in the light of all this we were right to vote down the deal. And I can tell the government that unanimously so far the opinion is the deal was so rotten we were absolutely right to vote it down, and that come what may we should continue to do so. And I'll tell the government now that when meaningful vote 3 comes back, I will see to it that we honour what we owe to them to keep voting this down, however many times it's brought back, whatever pressure we're put under, and come what may, please don't do it. Go back to the EU and say it won't pass.
Well, my honourable friend and I clearly have a different perspective on this. In my opinion, the Prime Minister's proposal delivers on the will of the people as expressed in the referendum. It means that we are leaving the single market and the customs union. We're taking back control of our money, our laws and our borders. We are getting out of the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy, and importantly, we will have the opportunity to write free trade deals with other nations around the world. But so importantly too is the fact that the Prime Minister's deal respects the views of so many who didn't want to leave the European Union, because what it ensures is that we will continue to have a close and collaborative relationship with our EU friends and neighbours. So in my opinion, it is the best combination to deliver on the will of the referendum.
Very well. If the honourable gentleman doesn't mind, and I'm always interested to hear his views, I would prefer to conclude the exchanges on the emergency business statement, and if the honourable gentleman is still keen to raise his point of order, I shall be happy to hear him. Yes, Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr. Speaker. When we were in talks with the Prime Minister before, probably a month, 6 weeks ago, she was adamant, absolutely adamant. It was no deal, it was her deal or revocation. Now the government has pivoted to extension. What's the change of position? Why didn't they stick to their no deal, her deal or revocation? Her deal's dead, and it's now between no deal and revocation.
Well, actually, what the Prime Minister was saying was that she was concerned that the House was not giving due consideration to her negotiated proposal. And what she was pointing out to the House is that the government is determined to fulfil on the will of the people expressed at the referendum, and that the alternatives to either a negotiated deal such as her deal and not fulfilling on the will of the people was to leave the EU without a deal, which nobody believes would be in the best interests of the country.
And Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has said that we would need to have a clear purpose in order to extend Article 50, particularly if that was for a short period of time. Can my right honourable friend tell the House whether she believes that a change of chief negotiator would amount to such a clear purpose?
Well, my honourable friend gives me the opportunity to pay tribute to the excellent work of the civil service, who have really spent the last 2.5 years above and beyond the call of duty, so many of them focused on delivering on the referendum, and I think there's something to be proud of.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Leader of the House not recognise that the Prime Minister will not be able to pass a deal simply with the support of the members, the honourable members that are sitting behind her. And if she had not fully recognised that until this evening, surely she does now. And that if there is going to be any deal that we can take to the European Parliament, the European Commission, the European Council, in order to try to secure any sort of deal other than a no-deal Brexit, she is going to have to negotiate a deal with members on this side of the House. Not just talk to members on this side of the House, but negotiate a deal with members on this side of the House.
My right honourable friend has indeed reached out to members across the House, and the honourable gentleman knows that full well.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Once again, we see a government that is happy to use the most arcane and incomprehensible procedures of this House when it suits it to frustrate the will of the House, but to ignore them when it suits the government. The honourable member for Rhondda, who is no longer in his seat, pointed out the government seemed determined to cast aside the time-honoured tradition that if you put forward a motion once and lose it, it's gone. Surely there's another time-honoured tradition that if the government have already decided, as they clearly have, when there will be this crucial third vote, it would be courtesy to tell the House now rather than keep it from some other time. But can the Leader of the House give a commitment that every member of the government will honour another time-honoured tradition, that when the meaningful vote is brought back and the discredited deal is rejected yet again, will the government commit to honouring the tradition of 3 strikes and they're out?
Hear, hear.
Well, I find it a bit odd that the honourable gentleman suggests that we're using arcane procedures. Well, what we're actually doing is using business motions and motions of the House, and those are by no means arcane. This is merely fulfilling on the commitment that the Prime Minister gave to ensuring that the House could first of all vote on whether it wished to take no deal off the table, and then could vote on whether it wished to request an extension to Article 50 from the European Union.
Marcus Fish.
Mr Speaker, can the Leader of the House say whether there will be some time to debate one aspect of the withdrawal agreement that has been proposed, which I think is quite interesting, but it really is an encapsulation of much of what's wrong with the government's attitude to the House in describing it, which is the backstop proposals for how the technicalities of customs work at the border. It is silent on VAT. It requires the EU's permission to be workable and compliant with the customs code in the EU, and it requires them to effectively agree to what the law of our borders would be. So it goes against the statement the government keeps making that we have control of money, borders and laws through the withdrawal agreement. How can we identify this and explain it more fully than the government has done today?
Well, what I can say to my honourable friend is I'm sure that there will be DEXU ministers on the front bench tomorrow, and that might be an appropriate time to raise his very specific questions then.
Can the Leader of the House tell me, because as a new MP I've lost my circus programme, what time will the close of play be tomorrow, or will there be an extension?
So the motion that's been laid suggests that the House will carry on its debate until 5 p.m, but it is a matter for the House to agree.
In other words, it's an amendable motion. Thank you. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Leader of the House if it's still the convention that if a government minister breaks a 3-line whip, they are expected to resign.
Well, what I would say to the honourable lady is that whipping is a matter for each chief whip, not a matter for me. I'm so pleased.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that Parliament has rejected leaving the EU in a no-deal scenario, the Leader of the House outlined that tomorrow we get to debate have a debate on extending Article 50, but she's also told us tonight that the government can't really go back to the EU and ask for that extension under Article 50, unless they have a proper deal agreed in Parliament. So what is she doing to actually bring forward mechanisms for Parliament to decide what they want to go back to the EU with in terms of that extension to Article 50, instead of this nonsense of another meaningful vote in the deal that we've already rejected twice?
Yeah. Well, I think perhaps the honourable gentleman has misunderstood. What I've said is that if the House should vote to extend Article 50, then the Prime Minister has said that she will indeed go to the EU and seek their agreement to that. But the fact is that it is only a request. The government is not able to insist upon it because it does require the agreement of all 27 EU members. So whilst we can request the extension on behalf of the House, and certainly will do so, if the EU agrees to such an extension, then the government will bring forward legislation. But the point that my right honourable friend was making is that we cannot insist on that extension.
Neil Gray. After Aberdeen's brilliant result against Rangers last night, it was probably only right to give Kilmarnock a wee win. Last night, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the House both gave a commitment that if no deal was backed by this House as a way forward, then that would become government policy. The extension of that principle and that logic, which is very important now after what the honourable member from Wickham has said, it means that the government should be adopting no deal as its policy now. So why is the first item of business tomorrow not a statutory instrument removing the 29th of March as the exit day from legislation?
That's right. The Prime Minister gave a commitment to allowing the House to decide if it wanted to decline to leave the European Union without a deal, and the House did make that decision, and that subsequent to that, the Prime Minister would give the House the opportunity to decide to extend Article 50 with the clear commitment to making that request should the House decide to make it. But the honourable gentleman will appreciate that the only way to avoid the legal default, which is still that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union on the 29th of March with or without a deal, is to put in place an alternative deal, or indeed to extend Article 50. And I've merely made the point, which is the fact, that that in itself does require the agreement of all 27 EU member states.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I think I'm right in saying that we come now to a series of motions which will be put to the House, and they're in the capable hands of the Deputy Speaker.
Yes, we now come to motion number 4, exiting the European Union food.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 5, exiting the European Union consumer protection.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No. Aye. Aye. No. Aye.
The division is deferred until Wednesday next. I will now take, with the leave of the House, motions 6, 7 and 8 together.
I beg to move.
Exiting the European Union consumer protection. 7, exiting the European Union consumer protection. 8, exiting the European Union financial services. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you. Petition Liz McInnes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to present a petition signed by 1,183 residents of Hayward and Middleton. The Post Office recently announced the plan to close 74 Crown Post Offices, including the Middleton Post Office in my constituency, and to franchise the service to branches of WH Smith. This puts jobs at risk, affects quality of service and accessibility, and will have a negative effect on Middleton Town Centre. In addition, there is uncertainty about the future of WH Smith itself, who have recently announced closures of some of their high street stores. It is a huge risk to relocate the post office services into a business which is closing stores and might lose more. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges the Government and Post Office Limited to keep Middleton Crown Post Office open at its current location, and the petitioners remain, etc.
Agreed.
Petition. Closure of Middleton Crown Post Office.
Thank you very much. I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Justin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So we've had another momentous debate and series of votes affecting the nation's future, but our role can also involve raising cases of individual injustices. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to recall an issue that has affected one of my constituents. His experiences may well have been affecting others as well, which is why I want to really bring it to the House's attention. So I hope that by debating this then, we can not only find a solution for my constituent by giving the government the opportunity to do the right thing, but also to ensure this situation doesn't happen again. So I hope that by setting out the history of my constituents' complaint today, lessons will be learned. Madam Deputy Speaker, those who serve our country make many sacrifices defending our interests, and they rightly deserve our respect, our support and fair treatment both during and after their service. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our armed forces personnel, past and present, who represent our country across the world and stand ready to defend our country day and night. So it saddens me that I'm having to bring this debate today to highlight a case where a former serviceman has, I believe, not been treated fairly or with the respect he deserves. And my constituent David Cottrell, who lives in Neston, served in the Army in the Cheshire Mercenary Regiment for a period of 22 years, from 1987 until 2009, during which time he saw active service in both Northern Ireland and Iraq. As a result of his service, he was left with a number of serious and long-term medical conditions and was awarded a war pension at 50% and a lower standard of occupation allowance in 2012. He suffers from a number of conditions, including post-traumatic stress disorder, which caused him to suffer disturbed sleep, anxiety and flashbacks. He also suffers from polyarthralia, aches and pains in his joints, and a number of medical conditions affecting his back, which causes him severe difficulty standing, walking, using the stairs and bending. It also causes him difficulty using his wrist to lift and carry everyday objects.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way?
Certainly will.
Thank you for giving way. I saw his permission beforehand, Madam Deputy Speaker, to intervene on him. Does the Honourable Member not agree that there must be a more simplified appeals process for war pensions when we take into account the fact that the stress of the appeals process for those suffering from PTSD, as the Honourable Gentleman has referred to as an example, can be the straw that breaks the camel's back? And this is another example of how our veterans are being let down by a system that has to be and must be urgently reviewed.
I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for his intervention in these times of uncertainty. The one certainty we can rely on is the Honourable Member for Strangford will intervene in the adjournment debate, and the point he made is absolutely on the point of my constituents' experiences. I think, as we will develop in the course of this debate, the experience he's had in the appeals process has been completely convoluted and only exacerbated his general conditions. So he's... As members will know, the War Pension Scheme is run by Veterans UK to provide benefits for disablement caused or made worse by service in the armed forces. There's no list of prescribed diseases. Claims can be made for any medical condition suffered, provided there is a causal link between the condition and military service. Rates for a war disablement pension depend on the degree of disability suffered, which is assessed on a percentage basis akin to the industrial injury scheme. A range of allowances and supplements may also be granted depending on an individual circumstances, including for employability, mobility, constant attendance or severe disablement. As of 31st of March 2018, there were 101,630 disablement pensioners and 15,854 war widows in receipt of a war pension, and in the year 2017-18, £517 million was paid out. With these amounts of money at stake, it goes without saying the process for assessment must be a robust one. War pensions claims are made to Veterans UK. If they're unhappy with the outcome, individuals can request a review of their war pension decision and can also make an appeal to an independent tribunal.
On that point, we'll try to see where we...
My honourable friend may be aware of the ongoing issue with those who allege that because of taking Lariam when they were in the forces, this has completely disabled them in later life. There has been really quite a Kafkaesque situation with the way in which this has been dealt with, and it is affecting many veterans. Would he agree that this is something that needs sorting out as a matter of urgency?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He's absolutely right. There are many scandals which really aren't going to go away and aren't going to be resolved until the truth and justice is delivered. And so I would support him entirely in his call there. So I want to talk a little bit, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the review and appeals process, because it has utterly failed my constituent in assisting him to receive the war disablement pension he's entitled to. Yes, sir, certainly will.
The Honourable Gentleman for giving way. This is a soldier that was in my regiment, even in my battalion, I suspect. May I ask the Honourable Gentleman whether his constituent has consulted with regimental headquarters, either in Chester or in Lichfield?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I don't know the answer to that. He has sought numerous sources of help and assistance throughout the years, some of which I will go into in the response, but it has proved to be an extremely time-consuming and convoluted process. It's caused him, as the honourable member for Strangford referred to, unnecessary stress, which has undoubtedly exacerbated his ill health and affected his quality of life. I believe opportunities to act and put things right were repeatedly missed throughout the handling of his case, and I hope his experience is not one that has been repeated by the 588 war pensions appeals that 11th November 2018 are still currently in train. As I've already stated, my constituent was awarded the war pension at 50% and a lower standard of occupational allowance in 2012, following an assessment that noted that Mr Cottrell, and I quote, cannot walk more than 200 metres without stopping or severe discomfort. Upon leaving the army, he worked for Manchester College as a tutor for a number of years, delivering training to professional drivers, which included on-the-road training as well as classroom-based training. In 2013, he applied for his pension from the college to be released early on health grounds, and he was referred to Dr Nightingale in December 2013 via the occupational health team for an assessment. Dr Nightingale concluded that he was unable to work as she did not, and I quote, envisage significant recovery to facilitate return to work in due course to enable gainful employment at 30 hours per week every week on a sustained basis for a 12-month period. As Mr Cottrell was unable to work, he submitted a deterioration claim to request a formal review of his war pension assessment in January 2014 and was sent for assessment to Atos Healthcare in April of that year. The report from this assessment is scattered with errors, which is not surprising when Mr Cottrell informs me that he was not asked all the questions that appeared in the report. And we've all heard about the errors and indignities that our constituents have suffered during these assessments. And earlier today I took part in a Westminster Hall debate on disability assessment services, where member after member brought up harrowing examples of flaws with the assessment procedure. Now is not the time to rehearse those massive flaws in the way those assessments are carried out, because actually, flawed though that assessment was, it's opportunities that were not taken afterwards to put the situation right, which is why I am here today. But I certainly will.
I think I'm going to forgive way, but would you not also agree with me that the pension age has been increased to 67 and we have WASPy women for 60 who must have served in the army as well, or the regiment, but they're entitled to a pension as well, along with others?
Well, yeah, I think my honourable friend for his intervention is right. The injustices that the WASPy women have suffered have been repeatedly mentioned in the chamber, and I think that when they see how we're incapable of finding a way through our current predicament, they will be disheartened to see that this government can't really deal with such a major injustice. But I'll just go back to the assessment for Mr Cottrell. There are many errors in it, including saying that he drinks alcohol occasionally when he wasn't even asked about alcohol during this assessment. It exaggerated his ability to walk. They said he could walk further than 800 metres despite only being observed walking 10 metres to the examination room during the assessment. And let's not forget, earlier in 2012, the assessment then said he couldn't walk more than 200 metres, and clearly his condition had not improved in the meantime. But perhaps the most incredulous part of the assessment was the conclusion that his PTSD was likely to improve, an assumption that was not based on any medical evidence whatsoever. It was in fact in direct contradiction to what Dr Nightingale had said in her report, that this would not happen. In fact, it is clear her views were not given anything like the same weight as the views of the Atos assessor, who only saw Mr Cotterill for a short period of time. As a result of the incorrect report, Mr Cotterill received a letter in July 2014 that said his pension rate would not change. He disputed the findings of that assessment. He did not believe the medical evidence had been adequately taken into consideration. His complaint was then referred to the Independent Complaints Executive, who informed Mr Cotterill that his complaint was not in their remit, and so he requested that Veterans UK investigate his complaint. Mr Cotterill informs me that the Chief Medical Officer of Veterans UK reviewed the complaint and concluded that Dr Nightingale's assessment was incorrect, as it only referred to him being unable to work for the next 12 months. But also, rather incredulously, he said that the report should not be trusted due to the close relationship Mr Cotterill would have with Dr Nightingale as his GP. Given that Dr Nightingale assists Mr Cotterill via the Occupational Health Department of his employer and was not his GP, this demonstrates clearly that the report was not properly considered, understood, or possibly even read at all. In fact, the contents of Dr Nightingale's report are really the nub of the issue, as it has transpired since that the paperwork shows the decision on Mr Cotterill's claim was made 3 days before the medical report from Dr Nightingale was actually received by the assessors. The report was recorded as being received by the department on the 14th of July, although for some reason it's dated on the 15th of July, but crucially, the decision on Mr Cotterill's claim was made on the 11th of July. This is a basic error, it's factually indisputable. Since that point, the whole process has been characterised by total failure to acknowledge that mistake and act accordingly. An example of this is that the records reveal that when the assessing doctor was informed that Dr Nightingale's report had been received late and he was asked whether that would have altered his decision, the assessing doctor didn't actually look at it again, because the response was in fact from a different colleague who said that the assessing doctor was not available, but in that new doctor's opinion, the original decision remained appropriate. It seems to me wholly inadequate to have one professional trying to effectively second-guess what another professional might have said. It should have been sent back to the original doctor to have the whole thing done again. And if that had happened, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much doubt that we would be here today. Anyway, following this decision, Mr Cotterill proceeded with the internal complaints procedure of Veterans UK, whilst also appealing the decision at tribunal, which was eventually heard in February 2015. The tribunal was unsuccessful. Ruling again, though, papers from the tribunal demonstrate that half of Dr Nightingale's report was omitted from the appeal pack, so for a second time, the full evidence was not considered. Following that, Mr Cotterill was then told that only procedural issues could be dealt with via the remaining complaints procedure. Mr Cotterill informs me that due to the controversy over Dr Nightingale's report, he decided to write to her himself in September 2015 regarding the interpretation the department had made of her report regarding the time period for which he was unfit to work. Dr Nightingale responded, stating that in her professional opinion, as had been detailed in the report previously, Mr Cotterill was permanently unable to work, and that letter was then sent to the MOD. In the meantime, Mr Cotterill made a new deterioration claim for extra allowances for his war pension, and Dr Nightingale's letter was added to the new claim file rather than being considered as part of the ongoing dispute regarding the Atos assessment of 2014. This review, however, did result in an increase in Mr Cotterill's war pension from 50 to 70% in August 2015 and an employability supplement in November 2015. Indeed, on 26th of November 2016, Mr Cotterill received a letter from the Veterans UK saying he was entitled to unemployability supplement because we think you are unable to work. Curiously, this decision did not require a medical assessment, and instead used both the letter submitted by his GP and the report made by Dr Nightingale. So 18 months on, we finally get the right decision, even though the medical opinion had not changed during that time. Given that both the information from his GP and Dr Nightingale had been discounted by Veterans UK previously, Mr Cotterill feels that this demonstrates their objection to the appeal was unfounded and that his award should have been backdated to January 2014 when the deterioration was originally reported and the application made. In the meantime, with regards to his complaint, Mr Cotterill was informed by Veterans UK that it would no longer respond to his or his solicitor's correspondence, and so referred the complaint to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. Following this, Mr Cotterill received a visit at home from the Customer Services Manager of Veterans UK, and he tells me during this visit he felt that he was being encouraged to drop his complaint because his new claim had been approved. I have to say, I find that a rather curious approach to take, if not an improper one, because frankly the implication that he should be satisfied with his lot is simply not good enough. My constituent deserves to receive the war pension he was fully entitled to from the beginning. He should not be expected to write off several years of underpayment just because the MOD got it right in the end. And I am deeply concerned that because the appeals process open to him was not sufficient to deal with his complaint and instead resulted in a drawn-out affair, which resulted in him using a solicitor running up a bill of nearly £5,000 in the process, it was only because of this, the financial cost, that he couldn't actually pursue his legal case any further. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been trying to resolve this unfair situation since June 2015, just after I got first elected. That's nearly 4 years. In that time, I've written to the Minister responsible on 9 occasions in the ICP, who subsequently took up Mr Cotterell's complaint twice. I just want to, at this point, pay tribute to my caseworker, Eve, who has done a great job in keeping this issue going all the way through, and I think we should all acknowledge the great work that our staff do. I think every member would agree that without them we wouldn't be anywhere near as effective as our constituents would like us to be. So, as you can tell, Madam Deputy Speaker, the details of this case are long and complicated, but at the heart of it lie 2 simple truths. Firstly, that a mistake was made in assessing Mr Cotterell's deterioration claim in 2014, and secondly, since then no one has been prepared to admit that mistake and put it right, and that's not how justice is supposed to work in this country. If a wrong has occurred, and I hope it is patently obvious from what I have said, the original decision was wrong, then nobody, and certainly not someone who has suffered as a result of service to their country, should be faced with such a begrudging attitude, which is essentially saying, well, we got there in the end, albeit a few years late, so be satisfied with what you've got. Which brings me back to where I started. Our servicemen and women deserve respect, they deserve support and fair treatment both during and after their service. I do not believe that has been shown in this appeals process. I'm concerned that the bodies and processes are not sufficient to deal with complaints in general. Eventually, the Veterans Advisory and Pension Committee, the VAPC, found in Mr Cotterell's favour and strongly recommended that his ward pension was backdated. Yet Veterans UK ignored this recommendation. I appreciate they are an advisory committee, but what is the point of making recommendations if no one listens to them and they cannot be enforced? Mr Cotterell was also concerned he was not actually able to present his case in person to the VAPC, which meant he could not, for example, make the case for repayment of his legal fees. Mr Cotterell does not know what evidence was considered by the panel, and his communications with VAPC were actually via Facebook Messenger. I think there is now an acceptance that that wasn't appropriate as a channel for communication, but it does bring into question what resources are available to the VAPC to deal with the administration of hearings, which seem to take an age to happen. It's also been brought to my attention that the independent complaints panel is made up of members of the VAPC, so how can that in those circumstances be independent? So, in my correspondence with the Minister and his predecessor, I've asked for a review of the way the case has been handled so that mistakes are learned and no one has to suffer the way my constituent has. I believe that my constituent deserves an apology from the MOD, compensation to cover his solicitor's fees and the backdating of his award to the original application date. As the Minister himself actually confirmed in a letter in March 2017, backdating of awards can be considered when there has been an error in the handling of the case. I believe, therefore, that is the only reasonable outcome. It was manifest that there was an error in the original assessment, and after 4 years there was a recognition by the VAPC that the original decision was wrong. But why my constituent feels so strongly about this, as do I, is that it shouldn't have taken 4 years to go through this process, which at the end of it turns out to be something that cannot actually be legally enforced. So whilst it is obviously an individual injustice that my constituent has suffered, questions need to be asked about how such an obvious error was allowed to continue for so long. I do believe the government also needs to review the powers of the VAPC. If its decisions cannot be enforced, then it is a toothless body, it gives people false hope and it wastes people's time. And frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, our veterans deserve better than that.
Minister Mark Lancaster.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I start, of course, by congratulating the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Paulson Neston on securing this evening's debate on this, frankly, very important subject. And at the outset, I should first like to pay tribute to all members of our armed forces, in whichever of the services they may serve, for their bravery and commitment to protecting the values and freedoms which we were so fortunate to enjoy in this country. I am sure that the House will agree that both they and those who serve before them are deserving of an enduring debt of gratitude by the nation, and that is precisely why debates such as this are so important and why, as I said before, I congratulate the Honourable Member for his persistence in this case. The government's concern for servicemen and women does not end when they leave Her Majesty's Armed Forces, and in the context of this debate, We are determined to ensure that where they have been injured, they have speedy, fair and transparent access to pensions and compensation rights. The Honourable Gentleman rightly raises his constituent Mr Cottrell's case. He also rightly highlights that this has been the subject of extensive ministerial correspondence now over some 4 years. Indeed, I was the Minister's predecessor, so some of the correspondence has been with me. So I am only too well aware of that case. He goes into enormous detail of the case, and much of that has been dealt with in the detailed correspondence we've had. And I think for the purpose of the debate this evening, it would not perhaps be in the House's interest that I go through all of that detail, not least because I don't have time. But there is a wider point here about how this process works. And I think what I would like to do, and I will come back to some detail later, is really touch on some misunderstandings about how this process works or is seen to work, but crucially, I hope for the House, also touch on how we are looking at improving this process so that hopefully cases like this will be more transparent and not go through the long-winded process that we have seen. So the tribunal was created in 2008 as part of the Unified Tribunal System, which was established at that time under the Tribunals Court and Enforcement Act of 2007. Formerly, this was dealt with by the Pensions Appeal Tribunal. There are separate tribunals for the veterans in Scotland and Northern Ireland, but United Kingdom law applies throughout. And this separation of process I will come back to, because this is one area where we can improve. I should stress that as the Tribunal Service is part of the Ministry of Justice, any decisions that they reach at the appeal are wholly independent of any decisions that may have been reached by the Ministry of Defence. The first-tier tribunal has jurisdiction to hear appeals from veterans who are unhappy with the decision reached by Veterans UK, the organisation that receives claims from service personnel under the compensation schemes which it administers. Veterans UK administers two schemes. The War Pension Scheme, which deals with injuries sustained or aggravated by service in Her Majesty's Armed Forces prior to the 6th of April 2005, and the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme, which deals with injuries sustained in service on or after the 6th of April 2005. So the tribunal's appeals process is determined by the tribunal procedure, first-tier tribunals, war pensions and armed forces compensation chamber rules. And let me explain how this process works. A claim is made by the claimant to my officials within Veterans UK. We've heard about that. They assess the merits of the claim and then reach a decision based on service and medical records and external medical advice from the claimant's general practitioner and hospital consultants as appropriate. A claim may typically be for a disabling injury or battle stress and psychological disorders. And if veterans do not allow the claimant can then seek a review of that decision. In the case of a claim under the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme, this is called a reconsideration. And if the decision remains the same upon review, the claimant may appeal to the first-tier tribunal. But they must do this within 1 year of receiving written notice of the Veterans UK decision. And in the case of claims under the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme, where a reconsideration has not been requested, it will, nonetheless, be carried out as part of the appeals process. So following an appeal against a decision being made to my officials within Veterans UK, they prepare what is known as a response document. And this document includes all of the evidence upon which the decision under appeal was based, along with any relevant medical and legislative information. And a copy of this is sent to the Tribunal Service, the appellant and their representative at the Tribunal. And once this has been received by the Tribunal Service, they begin the process of listing the hearing at a venue as close to the applicant's home as possible. And the appeal to the Tribunal is a full merits hearing, which means that it is a complete reappraisal of the case. The appellant can bring evidence and witnesses to the Tribunal, and the panel is made up of a judge, a medical member, and a service member. The panel ensures that proceedings are balanced and that they are inquisitorial in their approach. Tribunals are less formal than court environments, and every effort is made by the panel to assist appellants in putting their case. Sometimes, however, appellants are helped by members of various support groups and charities, such as the Royal British Legion, the Royal Air Forces Association, Combat Stress, BLESMA, the Limbless Veterans, the National Gulf Veterans and Families Associations and UK Armed Forces Charities. Of course I'll give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I also thank the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port and Neston. Can I also make the point to the House that one of the things that Mr Cotterill might or might not have done is lean on his friends who are actually in the Ellesmere Port company. There is a Cheshire Regiment old boys net there, and this is very, very important. And if the honourable member would like to give me more details, I seem to remember a Cotterill serving with me in Bosnia. If he'd like to give me details, I'll make sure there's a connection.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point that whilst there is very much a process, and this, I suppose, very much goes to the heart of our armed forces and indeed how we operate, it is that wider support mechanism which my honourable friend describes through the regimental associations, which can also offer significant assistance to our veterans when they have to go through what can be a fairly challenging and indeed difficult process. So I hope the honourable member will follow the advice of my honourable friend and indeed do that. But if I can go back briefly to the tribunal process, a decision of the first tier tribunal can be appealed to the Administrative Appeals Chamber or the upper tribunal if it appears that there may have been an error of law. And England, Wales and Northern Ireland are the only part of the United Kingdom where appealants in these cases must lodge their appeal with Veterans UK rather than the tribunal itself. Indeed, it is unique in this regard in the unified tribunal system. And I appreciate the concerns of many stakeholders in this area of law expressed over several years that this inconsistency is undesirable. And indeed, the complexity of process seems to have made a contribution to the honourable gentleman's case. So it has been suggested that the fact that Veterans UK is part of the MOD means that there is a lack of independent assessment of claims. But the government is satisfied that Veterans UK is scrupulous in assessing veterans' claims. And whilst it is accepted that there can sometimes be a delay in the sending of appeals documentation from Veterans UK to the first tier tribunal, this is an inherent risk in any system in which there are separate tiers of administration. The process in Scotland is quite different. There, appeals are sent by veterans directly to the tribunal, and this is what is known as a direct lodgement. And the government agrees that direct lodgement should also apply in England and Wales, although for this to happen, there would first need to be changes to the tribunal procedure rules, which are made by the Independent Tribunal Procedure Committee. So subject to the necessary changes just put in place by the committee, the Ministry of Justice intend to introduce direct lodgement as part of the ambitious programme of court and tribunal reform, in which they are investing about £1 billion and which is already underway. The aim is to introduce direct lodgement for veterans' pension and compensation appeals in England and Wales next year, 2020 if we can, but because of other work ahead of it in the reform programme, I can't give the House the firm assurance that that will happen. But what I would say, and I would like to draw the attention of the House to, is the vital role played by my officials within the Veterans Welfare Service. They can and do assist our veterans in submitting compensation claims and provide advice about how to submit an appeal should they be unhappy with a decision reached about by their compensation entitlement. And in addition to this, the Welfare Service can provide help and advice on a much wider range of issues, including access to charitable assistance, housing and entitlements to benefit from the Department of Work and Pensions. The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right to draw this House's attention to the challenges that his constituent has met whilst going through this process. And whilst the principal substances of his appeal was dismissed, there has been an apology for some of the handling of his case. But I hope I've taken this opportunity to outline to the House how we are looking at ways of making this process better and more fit for purpose in the future.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.